Hey guys, tonight we dive into the colorful, dangerous, and surprisingly political world of medieval court jesters. Those painted-faced figures who dance through throne rooms and whispered truths to kings. While movies make them look like simple entertainers, the reality is being a court jester was deadly serious business. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see our global audience. Now grab some snacks, maybe dim the lights, and let's explore the hidden world of royal fools together. Let's shatter the first myth right away. Court jesters weren't just medieval comedians with bells on their hats. They were political operatives disguised as entertainers, the only people in the entire kingdom who could tell a king he was an idiot and live to see morning. No one else in the royal court could say, "Your Majesty, that decision is absolutely terrible," without losing their head. But a jester could dance up to the throne, juggle some balls, and say, "What's the difference between the king and a donkey? One has long ears and makes poor decisions. The other is just a donkey." Everyone would laugh, including the king, and somehow the message got delivered. This wasn't accidental. It was the entire point of having a court jester. Being a jester meant walking the thinnest possible line between entertainment and treason every single day. You had to be funny enough to keep your job, smart enough to survive court politics, and brave enough to speak truths that could get anyone else executed. It was like being a stand-up comedian, therapist, and spy all rolled into one, with the constant threat of the gallows if you misread your audience. And your audience happened to be the most powerful person in the kingdom who could have you killed on a whim. Most people think jesters were born into the role or stumbled into it by accident. Wrong. Medieval jesters were often highly educated individuals who chose this dangerous profession. Many were former scholars, clerics, or even minor nobles who had fallen from grace. Some were foreigners who understood multiple languages and cultures, giving them unique perspectives on politics and society. Others were simply brilliant individuals who realized that humor was the only weapon that could penetrate the armor of absolute power. You didn't become a court jester by telling knock-knock jokes at the local tavern. You needed to understand politics, history, literature, and human psychology. You had to memorize genealogies, know which nobles hated each other, and understand the complex web of alliances that kept kingdoms from imploding. And you needed to do all of this while maintaining the facade of being a harmless fool. Many jesters were recruited specifically because they were intelligent. The position required someone who could process information quickly, adapt to changing political climates, and deliver complex messages through seemingly simple entertainment. A good jester was essentially a political consultant who happened to wear colorful clothes and carry a lute. Some jesters were even former advisors or courtiers who had fallen out of favor but were too valuable to simply execute. The role of jester became a form of political exile with benefits. You kept your head but lost your dignity, at least officially. The truth was, being a jester was often the only way for brilliant individuals to influence power without having any official authority. It was a backdoor into the corridors of influence disguised as entertainment. And the best jesters knew exactly what they were doing. So no, you didn't wake up one morning and decide to be a court jester. You were recruited, selected, or in some cases demoted into what was essentially the most dangerous job in the medieval world. The jester's most important job wasn't making people laugh. It was telling the king things no one else dared to say. In a world where absolute monarchs were surrounded by yes-men and terrified courtiers, the jester served as the only source of honest feedback. Kings lived in bubbles of flattery and fear. Everyone told them what they wanted to hear because disagreeing meant death. But jesters could package criticism in jokes, making bitter pills easier to swallow. A skilled jester could warn a king about corruption in his court by performing a play about greedy merchants. He could criticize a bad military decision through a song about a general who confused his sword with his brain. He could even mock the king's personal habits through riddles and wordplay. The key was making it funny enough that the king laughed instead of reaching for his executioner. This wasn't just entertainment. It was essential political communication. Medieval kings needed feedback, They just couldn't get it through normal channels. Jesters served as early warning systems for political disasters. They could gauge public opinion, test new ideas, and deliver intelligence about what people really thought about royal policies. Some of the most famous jesters in history were essentially prime ministers in motley. Will Sommers, jester to Henry VIII, regularly influenced royal policy through his wit. Triboulet, jester to Francis I of France, was consulted on matters of state. Buffon, the court fool of Louis XI, was trusted with diplomatic missions. The relationship between king and jester was often deeply personal. Kings would confide in their jesters, share their fears, and seek their counsel in ways they never could with official advisors. Because the jester was technically just entertainment, the king could drop his guard and speak honestly. But this intimacy came with enormous risk. The moment a jester's honesty stopped being amusing and started being threatening, their life expectancy dropped dramatically. Many jesters who pushed too hard or spoke too plainly ended up in dungeons or worse. The most successful jesters learned to read their audience perfectly. They knew when to push and when to retreat, when to speak in riddles and when to shut up entirely. It was a deadly dance performed on a stage where one wrong step meant curtains, literally. So yes, jesters told jokes, but their real job was speaking truth to power in the only way that wouldn't get them killed immediately. Let's talk about the tools of the trade. Forget the Hollywood image of a jester with nothing but a funny hat and a few jokes. Real medieval jesters were walking arsenals of entertainment and influence. They had to master multiple skills, often becoming some of the most talented performers in the kingdom. Music was essential. Every jester could play at least one instrument, usually the lute or harp, but often several. They composed songs on the spot, tailored to current events or specific audiences. A clever jester could write a ballad that seemed like innocent entertainment but actually contained biting political commentary or vital information. Storytelling was another crucial skill. Jesters were living libraries of folk tales, fables, and historical accounts. They could weave complex narratives that entertained the court while delivering pointed messages about leadership, morality, or current politics. The best jester stories worked on multiple levels, amusing children while making adults think. Physical comedy and acrobatics separated professional jesters from amateur entertainers. Many could juggle, walk on stilts, or perform elaborate pratfalls that looked accidental but were carefully choreographed. Some jesters were skilled dancers or mime artists who could convey entire conversations without saying a word. Then there were the props. The iconic bells, cap, and colorful motley weren't just costumes. They were tools. The bells served as percussion instruments and attention grabbers. The cap often concealed compartments for small props or even messages. The motley itself was a form of camouflage, marking the jester as separate from normal court hierarchy. Puppets were particularly important. Many jesters used hand puppets or marionettes to voice opinions they couldn't express directly. A puppet could insult a noble, criticize a policy, or even mock the king himself while the jester maintained plausible deniability. After all, it was just the puppet talking. Some jesters carried what were essentially portable theaters, small stages or backdrops that allowed them to perform elaborate shows anywhere in the castle. They were one-person entertainment companies, capable of mounting full productions with minimal setup. The most sophisticated jesters understood that their appearance was part of their message. The degree of dishevelment, the choice of colors, even the style of their performance could convey information to those who knew how to read the signs. But perhaps the most important tool was the jester's tongue, the ability to twist words, create double meanings, and speak in coded language that different audiences would interpret differently. A single performance might entertain children, warn nobles, and advise the king all simultaneously. So no, jesters weren't just guys with funny hats. They were multimedia artists, political commentators, and master communicators rolled into one. And their toolkit was as sophisticated as their mission was dangerous. Despite popular belief, court jesters couldn't just say anything they wanted. The idea that jesters had unlimited license to speak freely is one of history's most persistent myths. In reality, they operated within very specific boundaries, and crossing those lines meant death. The key was understanding what those boundaries were, and they shifted constantly. A joke that was hilarious on Tuesday might be treasonous on Wednesday if political winds changed. A jester had to read not just the king's mood, but the entire political climate of the court. Certain topics were always off limits. Direct challenges to the king's authority were suicide. Questioning the legitimacy of the royal bloodline was a fast track to the executioner. Personal attacks on the queen or royal family members were equally dangerous. And during times of war or political crisis, even mild criticism could be interpreted as enemy propaganda. The most successful jesters learned to dance around these forbidden zones. They criticized royal policies without attacking the king personally. They mocked general types of people without naming specific individuals. They spoke in allegories and metaphors that provided plausible deniability. Context was everything. A joke that would have been acceptable in private might be treasonous if delivered in front of foreign ambassadors. A riddle that was funny during peacetime could be seen as seditious during a rebellion. The same words could be entertainment or treason depending on who was listening. Some jesters developed elaborate systems of coded language that allowed them to communicate different messages to different audiences. The king might hear a harmless story about animals while courtiers understood it as commentary on current politics. It was like speaking in multiple languages simultaneously.
The smartest jesters also paid attention to royal favorites and enemies. A joke that mocked someone the king disliked would be well received, while the same joke about a royal favorite could end badly. Successful jesters became experts in court gossip and political alliances.
When jesters did cross the line, the punishments were swift and often creative. Some were exiled or imprisoned. Others faced physical punishment or even execution. But sometimes the punishment fit the crime in grimly ironic ways. Jesters who told bad jokes might have their tongues cut out. Those who mocked the wrong people might find themselves the subject of very public humiliation. The most dangerous moments came during political transitions. When a new king took power, old jesters often found themselves unemployed or worse. New rulers wanted their own entertainers, and yesterday's favorite fool could become today's scapegoat. Still, some jesters managed to navigate these treacherous waters for decades. They became institutions, surviving multiple kings and queens by constantly adapting their material and understanding that their survival depended on being useful without being threatening. So while jesters had more freedom of speech than anyone else in the medieval world, that freedom was neither absolute nor guaranteed. It was a privilege that had to be earned daily and could be revoked instantly. And the price of miscalculation wasn't just unemployment. It was often death. The life of a court jester was a strange mixture of privilege and precariousness. On one hand, jesters often enjoyed access to the highest levels of power, living in royal palaces, eating at the king's table, and traveling with the court. They had job security as long as they remained entertaining and useful. But this privilege came with isolation. Jesters existed outside normal social hierarchies. They weren't nobles, but they weren't commoners either. They had the king's ear, but couldn't trust anyone else in court. They were insiders and outsiders simultaneously, and this liminal status made genuine relationships nearly impossible. Most jesters remained unmarried, not by choice, but by circumstance. Who would marry someone whose survival depended on the whims of a monarch? Someone who might be executed for a poorly timed joke? Someone who could never speak honestly about their work or their daily life? Even other court servants kept their distance, understanding that association with a jester could be dangerous if the fool fell from grace. The constant performance was exhausting. Jesters couldn't simply clock out at the end of the day. They were expected to be on whenever the king wanted entertainment, which could be any time, day or night. Kings didn't respect normal working hours, and a jester who wasn't available when summoned might find themselves replaced. Sleep was irregular, meals were uncertain, and the stress of constant political navigation took its toll. Many jesters developed what we might now recognize as anxiety disorders or depression. They lived with the knowledge that their next performance might be their last, and that their survival depended on forces completely outside their control. Some jesters coped by developing multiple personas. They became skilled at compartmentalizing their personalities, maintaining a public face that was cheerful and entertaining while privately struggling with the emotional cost of their profession. The job also required constant travel. Court jesters followed their monarchs on royal progresses, military campaigns, and diplomatic missions. This meant weeks or months on the road, living in temporary accommodations and performing in unfamiliar settings for audiences who might not appreciate their particular style of humor. And there was no retirement plan for medieval jesters. They performed until they died, were dismissed, or became too old and frail to entertain effectively. Older jesters sometimes found themselves pensioned off if they were lucky, but many simply disappeared from historical records, their fate unknown. The successful jesters, those who managed to survive and even thrive in this dangerous profession, often did so by developing genuine relationships with their monarchs, becoming trusted confidants and advisors. But even these relationships were fundamentally unequal. The jester might influence the king, but the king always held the power of life and death. So while being a court jester offered opportunities for influence and relatively comfortable living, it came at enormous personal cost. It was a profession that demanded everything and guaranteed nothing. And for all their wit and wisdom, most jesters lived and died as ultimately tragic figures, caught between power and powerlessness. Many of history's most famous jesters weren't just entertainers. They were influential political figures whose words shaped kingdoms. Will Sommers, perhaps the most famous English jester, served Henry VIII for decades and reportedly influenced the king's decisions on everything from marriages to religious policy. Sommers was known for his ability to calm Henry's notorious temper through humor, and his wit may have saved several courtiers from the king's wrath. In France, Triboulet, jester to Francis I, was consulted on matters of state and accompanied the king on diplomatic missions. His insights into human nature and political dynamics were so valued that Francis often sought his counsel before making important decisions. Triboulet understood that his influence came not from his official position, but from his ability to see situations clearly and communicate truth through entertainment. Will Kemp, who later became famous as a Shakespearean actor, began his career as a court entertainer. He demonstrated how jesters could transition between roles, moving from political commentary to pure artistic expression. His success showed that the skills developed in court service could open doors to other opportunities. Some jesters wielded their influence for social good. Buffon, the fool of Louis XI, regularly advocated for common people, bringing their concerns to royal attention through his performances. He used his position to highlight injustices and push for reforms, understanding that his unique access to power came with responsibilities. But influence was always dangerous. The moment a jester's political impact became too obvious or threatened the wrong people, their position became precarious. Many successful jesters learned to hide their influence, to make their political contributions seem accidental or incidental to their entertainment value. Female jesters, though less common, also made their mark. Jane Fool served as a court entertainer to Henry VIII's daughter Mary and later to Elizabeth Thurse. These women navigated even more complex social expectations, having to balance entertainment with the additional constraints placed on women in medieval society. The most effective jesters understood that their power was soft power. They influenced through persuasion, humor, and personal relationships rather than through official authority. They became skilled at planting ideas that their monarchs would later believe they had developed independently. Some jesters even became unofficial diplomats. Their ability to communicate across cultural and linguistic barriers made them valuable in international negotiations. A jester who could entertain foreign dignitaries while subtly gathering intelligence was worth their weight in gold. But perhaps the most important contribution of successful jesters was their role in preventing political disasters. By providing honest feedback and alternative perspectives, they helped kings avoid decisions that might have led to rebellions, wars, or economic collapse. In many cases, a well-timed joke or carefully crafted story may have changed the course of history. The legacy of these influential jesters extends beyond their individual achievements. They established the template for how humor and entertainment could be used as vehicles for political and social commentary. Their techniques influenced everything from satirical literature to modern political comedy. So while they wore funny clothes and told jokes, the best medieval jesters were serious political actors who understood how to wield influence in a world where direct power was impossible. Their impact on history may be difficult to measure, but it was undeniably real. The tradition of the court jester didn't simply disappear, it evolved. As absolute monarchies gave way to more democratic forms of government, the need for someone to speak truth to power through humor found new expressions. In some ways, modern political satirists, comedians, and late-night talk show hosts serve similar functions to medieval jesters. They use humor to criticize those in power, provide commentary on current events, and offer alternative perspectives on political issues. The tools have changed, but the basic mission remains the same: making the powerful uncomfortable through laughter. Political cartoonists particularly embody the jester tradition. Their drawings and caricatures serve the same function as a medieval jester's songs or stories, distilling complex political situations into accessible, memorable forms that can influence public opinion. Even court systems themselves evolved to include some of the functions once served by jesters. The role of devil's advocate in formal decision-making processes ensures that alternative viewpoints are heard and considered. It's an institutionalized version of what jesters once provided informally. The concept of speaking truth to power through humor has become so embedded in Western culture that we sometimes forget how revolutionary it once was. The idea that anyone could mock those in authority, that criticism could be delivered through entertainment, was largely established by medieval jesters. Their influence can be seen in everything from Shakespeare's fools, who often serve as the wisest characters in his plays, to modern stand-up comedians who tackle political and social issues. The jester's techniques of using wordplay, metaphor, and timing to deliver serious messages have become fundamental tools of satirical communication. Perhaps most importantly, the jester tradition established the principle that even absolute power needs to be questioned. The idea that authority figures should be subject to criticism, even if delivered through humor, helped lay the groundwork for more democratic societies. Modern media often serves a jester-like function, holding politicians accountable through investigative reporting and commentary. The Fourth Estate concept of journalism as a check on government power has clear connections to the medieval jester's role as unofficial truth-teller. And in authoritarian regimes where direct political criticism is dangerous, comedians and entertainers still find ways to comment on power using the same techniques developed by medieval jesters. Coded language, double meanings, and the protection of entertainment continue to provide cover for political commentary. The jester's legacy reminds us that humor has always been a powerful force for social and political change. The ability to make people laugh while making them think remains one of the most effective ways to challenge authority and promote new ideas. So while the pointy hats and bells are long gone, the spirit of the medieval jester lives on in every comedian who dares to mock the powerful, every satirist who exposes hypocrisy, and every entertainer who uses their platform to speak uncomfortable truths. The fool may be dead, but the fool's wisdom endures. By now, you've probably realized that being a medieval court jester wasn't about silly jokes and harmless pranks. It was a deadly serious profession that required intelligence, courage, and an almost supernatural ability to read people and situations. Only people brave or crazy enough to tell kings exactly what they needed to hear. You wouldn't last as a court jester, not a week, maybe not even a day, because you'd start with the wrong assumptions, that you could just tell funny stories and make people laugh. But what you'd really need is the ability to navigate deadly political waters while maintaining the facade of harmless entertainment. You'd walk into court ready to perform, only to discover that the king's mood had changed overnight. That yesterday's favorite topic was today's forbidden subject. That the noble you planned to gently mock had just become the royal favorite. And suddenly your carefully prepared routine wasn't entertaining, it was treasonous. You'd freeze at the wrong moment, tell the wrong joke, misread the king's expression, or fail to notice the subtle power shifts that determined whether your performance would be applauded or punished. And instead of laughter, you'd hear the cold silence that meant your time was up. Even if you managed to entertain the king, you'd still have to deal with the aftermath. Jealous courtiers who resented your access, nobles who felt mocked by your performance, political rivals who saw you as a threat, and the constant knowledge that your survival depended on remaining useful without becoming threatening. Let's say you somehow avoided political execution. Then you'd face the psychological toll, the isolation of never being able to form genuine relationships, the exhaustion of constant performance, the stress of knowing that every word could be your last, and the growing realization that you were living on borrowed time in a profession with no real future. So, no, you wouldn't make it as a medieval court jester, because the job wasn't about entertainment. It was about surviving in the deadliest game of all, speaking truth to absolute power. And that required skills that went far beyond telling jokes. It demanded a level of courage, intelligence, and political sophistication that most people simply don't possess. The court jester may have died out centuries ago, but their legacy lives on in every satirist who dares to mock authority, every comedian who uses humor to expose truth, and every entertainer brave enough to speak uncomfortable realities to those in power. The bells and motley are gone, but the jester's mission endures. Because every society needs someone willing to play the fool in order to speak the truth. So the next time you see a comedian taking on politicians or a satirist exposing hypocrisy, remember the medieval jesters who pioneered these techniques.